Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. I'm Bill Davis, sitting in this morning for Alex Lindsay, who is on vacation for a couple of days, well-deserved. If you have never been to Office Hours before, welcome. Basically, what happens here is we handle technology questions live on the internet that come from all over the world. And so if you've never seen the show before, it's pretty simple. Basically, people use a system we call Mukana to put in questions, and you are available to do that. So if you'd like to, if you're coming to us for the first time from YouTube, all you have to do is look down below and you'll see a link to the Zoom show, which is where we're live. Then if you get to Zoom and you look in the question and answer or the question chat tab there, you will see a link to our Mukana service. Once you're in Mukana, it's a process of just looking around through the interface. First of all, you'll see the live chat that happens every day where people discuss what we're talking about and other topics. And then if you look through the tabs, you will find a place where you can enter your own questions. And that system drives the topics and how much time we spend talking about things here on the show. So basically, your questions are what we talk about. The process has two parts. You put in your questions, but then second and equally important, you vote your questions up. And the questions that rise to the top get the most time, and we go into the most depth. We talk about everything having to do with production, with the internet, technology in general. We cover a pretty wide range of things. And in fact, a very good example was just the show yesterday where our dear friend Guy Cochran was hosting and did a fabulous job of curating a discussion about Zoom's new changes, literally the day they happen. And that's kind of the magic of Office Hours, is because we're on every day in real time, we get to react to things that changed. And I know that yesterday I learned a ton because Guy guided a fabulous conversation about that really brought me up to speed with what had happened in the moment. As Zoom made their changes, we had a representative from Zoom. We had other experts talking about what those changes mean. So this really is a great place to come in and kind of keep up with the latest and greatest changes. That said, I mentioned that questions drive the show here. So we are going to go through the questions, and it looks like I'm going to do double duty today and read the question, and then we'll talk about them. The panelists will raise their hands. We'll have this conversation, and let's dive into it. First question comes from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, who says the BBC in the UK provides commercial-free TV and radio over the air via cable, satellite, and online, live and on demand via its own iPlayer platform. It's difficult thinking of broadcasting as dying when thinking about the BBC. And I know we have people from the BBC or from the aisles here. So let's start with Ken Jordan, then go to Nigel Dessau after that. Go ahead, Ken, your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you have to remember, even though it is commercial free, we pay £159 a year. That's 26 million of us to the BBC. So think of it on that plane first when you think of that amount of money they have of what they're doing.
And go ahead, Nigel. You want to make some comments?
Yeah, I'd just add to that it's not free. Somebody pays for it. But there is an element that makes the BBC fundamentally different, which is being funded by the government and not by commercial. It is able to do things and experiment in a way that a traditional corporate network in the US, for instance, wouldn't be allowed to do. And I think it will probably be the last man standing or person standing when broadcasting dies.
Carl Asmussen.
Yeah, so Australia has the ABC, which is slightly different in its charter as far as the BBC. But again, it's paid for by taxpayers. But there's no license fee either. It has a similar things. It has iView. It has all those kind of things like the iPlayer in Britain. It is the highest quality standard now. The iView player looks almost like Netflix. So that's how much content they've gathered over 70 years. They've even got archives, which you're allowed to go into. So if you can't find it on iView, you're allowed to ask for the archives. So if you wanted to see the Queen's visit in 1954, you can just ask for it and they'll give you all the footage. It's pretty cool. So that's one of the benefits of having a government-funded channel. Essentially, that's what it is. But it's actually a lot more than a channel, just like the BBC is a lot more than a channel. Is that you get all these perks.
Let's move on. Rupert McCrae and then Roscoe Jones. Go ahead, Rupert.
So when I said commercial free, I mean, there is a unique way in which the BBC is funded, which is kind of a catchphrase. But also it means there are no commercials on those channels. So when you're watching BBC TV, you're not getting commercial breaks. You're just getting pure content. And it's also important to note that's only required for TV. It's perfectly free to receive BBC radio as much as you like.
Okay, Roscoe Jones.
Yeah, I know that Apple TV wants to become the player of default for all the streaming services by just kind of pulling everyone underneath their umbrella. But I listen to TuneIn a lot, which is a radio streaming app, and the quality is just not there. Radio broadcast always had very good audio levels, from commercials to programming, because there's an antenna at the end of the chain, I think. And the guy's like, I don't want you to burn out my antenna, so I'm going to make sure you don't come in. I just find that quality has gone out the window when it comes to streaming radio apps and the relatives. It's a hard thing to say it's going to be take off, because I think that's going to hurt them.
Let's go to Greg Gibson, then Leo Mindell. Go ahead, Greg.
Thanks, Bill. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with sort of the evolution of broadcast. If you think about how broadcast came about, it was a direct over the airways, direct to the consumer. Anybody with an antenna could pick up a feed. And then, after that, it evolved into all these aggregators, the cable companies, et cetera, kind of got involved. And now they were making deals with the with content providers and sending those feeds to the consumer. So they kind of So the content providers lost a little bit of control over their content, and also they were paying a fee for distribution now, where they weren't really doing that previously. And so I think some of it is, wanting to sort of take back, one, maximizing profits, because now they've got direct access to the consumer and they're not necessarily having to pay the fees to the aggregators. And also, Courtney was talking about quality. Now they have more control over the quality of the programming. And so I think it's kind of just a natural evolution of wanting to get back to having that direct access to the consumer and not necessarily having to go through the aggregators. And, I'm on Verizon here, and we constantly kind of lose channels occasionally because of disputes over fees. And so there's kind of always that morph between who's going to pay for what. And so again, I think, it just kind of goes back to wanting to have that direct access to the consumers.
Fair enough. Leo Mindell, and then we'll finish up with Ken Jordan.
So as well as the BBC and the charter that exists here, we also have some other TV channels which are semi-unique, one of which is Channel 4. And Channel 4 is also, although it's ad funded, it is also government owned, or it's owned in a different way. So it doesn't, every penny that Channel 4 makes, it puts back into its programming. And it means that Channel 4 breaks programming that a commercial TV channel wouldn't actually spend time doing. And they do create programming that is just unique. And a lot of things that you see that come out that then get syndicated or span out and become super successful around the world start in these incubating ideas. And that's, I think, the two things that the BBC and Channel 4 offer that are unique, that they can enable people to try out stuff. They also don't deliver at times. So a good example was this week, the England were in the Euros, BBC were broadcasting it out as 4K, and they basically had to pull their 4K halfway through because they didn't have enough bandwidth to deliver it. I couldn't get it on 4K.
Oh, Ken Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, just to say that even though, yes, it is commercial free for us in the UK, the BBC does have a very big commercial arm in terms of selling its programs abroad. And even though we don't have kind of direct commercials, there are indirect commercials on the BBC where they're promoting other services on the between the shows. They're promoting other BBC programs, which are ones which they sell for quite a lot in abroad.
I have a little follow on, and it's just real quick. I just want, I'll go to three people for just 10 seconds apiece. But in America, obviously, we have this commercial system, and if you pay enough, you can get hundreds of channels. And we hear that in some other systems, there are fewer than that by far. When is it too many? When is too much choice a bad thing? And just the first two or three people who might want to comment on that. I mean, is it better to have lots and lots of channels to the point where it's hard to pick them? Or is it better to have fewer quality channels? What do you think, Rupert?
It's better for the advertiser to have more channels, because chances are they're going to be specialist interests or niche markets, and then they can focus their advertising on that channel.
Muted, Bill.
Bill, you're muted.
I'm muted. Thank you. I'm still getting used to this new system for me. So we're going to move on to Gordon Lake's question from Los Angeles, California. When looking for the best solutions to bring remote guests into the ATEM switcher, what are the main considerations? For example, how would I choose between Zoom and Rivet? Who wants to attack the differences between Zoom's system bringing remote guests into an ATEM? We talk a lot about this actually, and about pinning people and bringing in ISOs into Zoom. Greg, you had your hand up. Let's go to you.
Thanks, Bill. I mean, I haven't really used Rivet, but what I understand about Rivet is it's an SRT feed. And so where Rivet's going to really help you is in a situation where you've got really limited internet access. It's going to give you a much higher quality feed than what you're going to get through Zoom.
I think after listening to people who really know this stuff talk for a long time, Zoom has become the gigantic monster because they were there at exactly the right place at the right time and have worked really hard to earn their chops with this explosion from 20,000 to 20 billion users. Oh, there we go. Talak is in, and so is Rupert McRae. So Talak, let's give some of your thoughts.
Just on the actual hardware side of things, remember you can take and screen scrape whichever type of meeting you're doing into an ATEM with an HDMI. And now that there is Zoom Rooms and Zoom ISO, you can take and change, bring out HDMI into your ATEM and really get some really, really good contributions to your meeting or to your presentation from Zoom. And Rivet is not something I know, so I'm not going to speak to that.
Rupert McRae.
Yeah, so since the ATEM is going to have hardware inputs, HDMI, you're either way, no matter what system you're going to use, you're going to need a way of translating those software inputs, whether it's Zoom, SRT, or whatever else, to a baseband format that you can get into your switcher. So you're going to have to convert them no matter what.
Richard Lavery.
Yeah, one of the other kind of non-technical considerations is just the end user. We've tried using Wirecast system, we've tried using a couple of different systems, and Zoom is reliably simple for people to use now. People have got so used to it that it's getting a remote guest to understand how to turn on original sound, how to get a good camera feed, how to kind of connect to it, and how to manage their bandwidth. It's much easier for the guest a lot of the times to have a system that's really simple. So if Zoom is that's great. If Skype is that's great too.
And I just wanted to note that we've talked about this subject a ton on Office Hours over the course of the past year. And in the Discord system that we use, which archives a little Q&A all the time, 24/7, has, I'm sure, a ton of material on this. If you want to go look there for topics related to this, you'll find a lot. Let's move on. Douglas Carmichael has our next question. One argument in favor of returning to the office has been spontaneous interactions that many say are harder via online communication. With the creative use of online platforms like a chat channel on Slack or Teams, could this be duplicated? And Rupert McRae popped his hand up real quick, and then Carl. Go ahead, Rupert.
So there is some value in spontaneous things that can happen in an office environment, but let's not forget that not all spontaneous interactions are a good use of time sometimes. I mean, sometimes they can get off track. But in an online environment, I would say that it is possible to build. I think the question said it is harder. Well, we're less practiced at doing this online right now. I think it is going to be more difficult on a chat-only channel like Slack. But if you bring Zoom into the mix, or Teams, or video really, and organize yourself into groups, and companies will get better at doing social events, maybe on a video event and things like that. And there are out of extracurricular activities like office hours, then that will just become easier.
Well, okay, we're going to go to Carl, then Charles, then Nigel. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I think office hours pre-show and post-show are a good example of spontaneous conversations with people who have a baseline of knowing who each other is, even though it's in the virtual world. So if you just leave us alone for half an hour, in a Zoom meeting, we will have.
You're saying we're happy to talk a lot.
So that's the thing, and because there's a certain familiarity we have with each other, and we have ground rules, and that's another thing. So workplaces have ground rules too. But it works. But you're right. may take a little while. It's not going to be instantaneous. It's not going to be like, it happens in an afternoon, but give it 1 or 2 weeks and you'll find some very interesting conversations, spontaneous conversations around the water cooler happening inside Zoom meetings.
Okay, Charles Klein.
Yeah, I actually second everything that Carl said. And the question that we've had at the office at times has been, why are we trying to recreate the same pros and cons into a different medium? Where when we're at the office and we're in person, it's something that we've done for years, right? So that's something that we know. We've exhausted the possibilities to do that. Now we have a different medium. So we're going to find and develop different pros and cons over time. And for example, like office hours, there's no way that we would have been able to do this in person. I mean, I've never met Mickey. I don't know where Jesse is. Bill, I've done work for now. So that's something that would have not happened in the in-person meeting, but now we can do that here. So I think the focus should be on what are the possibilities that we can develop now going forward instead of trying to bridge things from one to the other.
I think that's a great perspective. It's been really surprising how much this has added to my life, and I know others feel the same. Let's go to Nigel, then Courtney. Go ahead, Nigel, and then Greg.
Yes, in the words of the great Mickey, I think it depends. I think there are multiple different types of communication. There are multiple different types of meeting. I think the pre-meeting does something very well. But by the way, so does getting my whole team in a room with a flip chart or a whiteboard with sticky notes, planning stuff. And maybe that's because we're all old and we don't know how to do it properly electronically. There's some point, everybody crowding around a board and moving sticky notes is a very useful way where we can see each other's body language, we can talk over each other, we can shout, we can argue. There's an emotional link as you're building a team that's about to take a hill you can't do virtually, in my opinion.
Go to Courtney, then Jesse, then Leo.
Yeah, in the corporate environment, a lot of those spontaneous interactions had to do with off-the-record comments about something the corporation was doing or something, personal information or something. And of course, you don't want to duplicate that in a virtual situation because the paranoia that it would establish a fear of being recorded by the corporation or overheard by the corporation would be too great. So I think you're never going to get that same level of spontaneous interaction for fear out of the individuals that are doing that normally in the office. Water cooler conversation. Imagine if your water cooler conversations were recorded by your boss every day.
Ooh. Jesse next, then Leo, then Ken.
Yeah, great points, and I agree with all these views. Certainly, Nigel's view that there's something about in person. There's a chemistry that can never be replicated online. But having said that, and Alex has pointed this out, that everybody can't necessarily hear as well in an in-person event. Like if I think about people that have reduced hearing, reduced vision, any of that, when you're on a Zoom, you have the ability to put in a proper earpiece, dial up the level so that you can actually get a better understanding of everybody in the room.
So Leo, then Ken, then Greg. Go ahead, Leo.
Yes, there's two things here. First of all, these conversations or a set of conversations happen all the time on Slack. In my office, we have Slack channels that are really active. They're just a different type of conversation in a different way. And if I go back into the dawn of time, we were doing this with MSN Messenger. We were doing this with ICQ. We were doing this with half a dozen different products over the times, right back Windows Messenger and others. The other thing, though, I was going to say, and a really, really good example of it was the pre-show this morning. Alex was on a mobile phone. It was so hard to hear him. If that was what office hours was like all the time, office hours, as we know it, wouldn't exist.
Oops, Ken, Greg, and Nigel. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, as someone who runs premium workshops, I have to kind of counter Nigel's view on that. The benefit of doing them over Zoom is that not the loudest voice is the only one that is heard. It's obviously it needs to be well moderated, but everyone gets an equal chance to speak. Everyone gets an equal chance to put their input into a workshop. So I find the workshops that I run, well, the feedback I get from my clients who take my workshops is that they found them much more. They got a lot more from them because the platform was a level playing field for everyone who could take part and involve in that.
Moving to Greg and then Rupert. I'm sorry, I said Nigel, but it's Rupert after that. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, I think Charles made a really good point, just in the interaction that we've had here in office hours for the last year. I mean, I really feel like you guys have become kind of my peer group. I've never met Bill. I've never met Leah. I've never met Jeffrey. I've never met any of the people that I see on the screen here, but I feel like, I feel like I know you guys, and I feel like I go to somewhere like NAB or wherever, and it would be, like we had known each other forever. But there was a bit of a dispute here in the DC area recently where the editor of a prominent magazine posted wrote an op-ed piece for the Washington Post. And in that, she said that in her opinion, and she was warning her employees that those that wanted to remain on work from home became less valuable and easier to replace. Part of it is just kind of out of sight, out of mind, but in the piece, she said that in addition to your direct job duties, that you have other unofficial duties, such as helping a colleague or mentoring junior people or celebrating somebody's birthday and just participating in things that sort of drive an office culture. And she said that those responsibilities that she felt could only be done in person in the office made up about 20% of their job duties. And so the result of that was that she alienated most of her staff, and they actually went on strike for a day and didn't publish. They didn't publish the magazine online for a full day. So,
Interesting. Well, that's direct feedback real fast. Rupert, let's finish things up, and then we're going to accelerate a little bit because we have a good number of questions here.
So from an online tools perspective, whether it's Slack or Zoom or whatever, I think we all know that we've seen the administrative back end of those systems, and if you're a manager, you can pull out all kinds of statistics over who's doing talking, who's interacting, who's active, all this meta information about what your team and your staff are doing. Now, as we move into hybrid, it's important to remember that technology is going to evolve also in the office. And some of these systems and integrators are looking at ways of how office space can be monitored, particularly in terms of amounts of staff and things like that. And if you look at the big cloud camera providers, I mean, Meraki's got a cloud AI camera system, and they're looking at also some ways of monitoring and reporting on how many staff are here, what are the interactions looking at, who's wasting the most time, maybe. I mean, just think of the possibilities there also.
Very big.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying for my metrics, my time on camera would be very high, but my bloviating to actually saying anything useful time ratio would be terrible. We're going to move on. Douglas Carmichael next. When looking at secondary Windows workstation to supplement my Mac, I've heard don't get a laptop if you need to be mobile. However, my goal is to reduce desk clutter. Would a mini-ITX PC be a better choice than a Razer Blade, for example? Jeffrey has his hand up.
So, and I've talked about this several times. If you got your primary machine, try not to make your primary machine a laptop. It's better to have a desktop. It's got a better processor in it. It's a more full processor in it. It's got better graphics in it. You can put more memory into it and a lot more. If you're talking about using it as a supplement machine to complement the Mac that you have, you should. That's not a big deal because you're actually making things more modular, and you'll be able to use it just fine. Mini-ITX PC, that would work really well. You can put in a good graphics card into that and work from there. But yeah, laptops, you should be fine with what you got.
Let's go to Rupert McRae, then Peter Sargent. Go ahead, Rupert.
I would say if you need lots of inputs and outputs and you don't want to spend your life neck deep in docking stations and adapters and dongles, then maybe go with the desktop.
Peter Sargent. Oops, Peter, you're muted.
Yeah, I was actually going to agree with both gentlemen. I mean, one thing I realized, I was using multiple laptops at one point in time, and I realized it doesn't reduce desk clutter. In fact, it covers more of the desk. So now I've gone to a well, a Mac Pro, so it's a tower, but it's hidden behind my screens and not in front of me all the time. And I have a laptop off to the side for secondary things that have to be done.
Courtney?
Of course, this conversation can't go on without discussing the B-Link
by Courtney.
It's now available again by this one particular model, actually. The Gemini M is now available on Amazon again. But this, no dongles required because it's got, gigabit Ethernet. It's got 2 HDMI ports. It can be mounted on the back of a monitor. Takes up no desk space whatsoever. Now, it's not a gaming machine, if that's what you're looking for, but it does give you the ability. It runs Windows Pro, Windows 10 Pro, so it does give you the ability to run any Windows software and remote into it from anywhere. So it has those advantages going for it.
I listen to the PC people on PCs. I know in my case, I'm sitting here at a laptop, but I've got 5 screens hung around it. And my experience, I don't think is any different than when I'm working on a desktop machine. But I'm going to go back to Jeffrey Powers because he uses Windows, and you're going to finish things up.
Yeah, Peter made a good point. It's not going to give you any more desk space. So the mini-ITX, the best part about that is if you add a KVM to them, then you can use one monitor, one keyboard, one mouse, or do remote desktop into it to do the exact same, which is what I do when I bring in my graphics on any of my shows. But the only issue that you have to worry about is airflow and making sure that they're separated properly if you're stacking PC upon PC, and make sure that you got enough air to get through the whole thing.
Gabriel Ong in Malaysia has our next question, and Gabriel says, is it possible to run Zoom rooms on virtual machines on AWS? I understand that Zoom rooms require a camera and a mic before it can function, as well as a hardware controller. NDI outputs are great for production, and I'm exploring this workflow. And then his question kind of runs out. So hopefully everybody got the sense of it. And let's go to Greg Gibson.
Yes, it is possible to run a Zoom room in the cloud. It doesn't run by default on most of the typical AMIs, so there are some modifications that you need to make to the machines in order to make it run. As far as the hardware controllers go, I haven't been able to get a hardware controller to work, but I tell you what works really well is the web controller. And unfortunately, right now the web controller hasn't been updated yet to work with NDI. And so that was one of the things we talked about yesterday with Sam, was trying to get that web controller going. And that's a really, like the web, I would even, just on my local machines, I try to use the web controller when I can, because typically I'm trying to manage multiple Zoom rooms at any one time. And so I can pull the web controller up in browser tabs and I can have it right here in front of me versus trying to have a stack of hardware controllers on my desk here, which is really inefficient. So, yeah, but to answer the question, yeah, absolutely, you can run Zoom rooms in the cloud, and it's going to be a great workflow, particularly once that web controller is updated to support it.
Rupert McRae.
So I'm not sure, but maybe the hardware, you may have more luck with the hardware controllers if you actually have a VPN from your location to your VPC. That might help the communication.
Okay, and Rupert is right back with the next question here, actually, from Dallas, Texas. CBRE, the commercial real estate firm, believes that companies will focus on hybrid work and employee flexibility with some immediate changes, such as an enhanced video conferencing suite. Is in-office video going to be a booming business now as well? Who wants to talk about it? Nigel is going to hop in first. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about people working from home in the last year, but one of the interesting things is things like office hours is changing the expectations of things like conference rooms when people do go back to work. Because if you have to go back to work for whatever reason, whether people think it's right, wrong, or indifferent, you're now in a conference room with poor lighting, poor sound, terrible video, a squash frog trying to produce sounds in the center of the table. And I think many of us are, and we've started to notice people saying, why can't I have a little bit better experience in the conference room? Why do I have to put up with this terrible experience? So actually there's some migration back from the consumerization back into the workplace.
I want to see a marketing campaign. Polycom, squashed frogs, but they work. Jesse, you're next.
Yeah, I do think that the office video is going to need to be improved, as well as the home office video is going to need to be improved, because the way I see the workforce going forward is it's going to be more common for companies to let people work a certain amount of days at home.
So imagine a week where 2 days a week you're going in for team building type events or other things where maybe physically it's felt that there's a better connection between people, or you're doing a client presentation or something. But there's going to be a larger amount of days where I think a percentage of the workforce is going to be beaming in from home. So if both ends of that communication link are improved, it's going to be the best method, I think, for the company to move forward.
Okay. Oh, Rupert has his hand up, and then Peter, and then Mark. Go ahead, Rupert.
So when I read this, I mean, it's obviously from CBRE. They're a big real estate firm. They're trying to come at it from their angle. But I know we're talking about people going back into the office. But don't forget, there's going to be a whole new breed of companies moving forward that will not have an office and will never have had one and will probably never have one. So we're talking about people going back to something that may, in some cases, not exist.
Peter Sargent.
Well, I was going to say two things. One is I remember a lunch conversation with Nigel where he was talking about, particularly in the high-end homes, you know, I'll call them home offices, but really home studios being starting to appear, so people can telework from home if they want to, or communicate. But I also remember when I first started with the IBM company 45 years ago, and the job I had for the first 10 years, in many cases, I was bending iron. There was no way I was going to telework for that. That was literally going in, and I actually have to go in and assemble things, right? And so I think it's going to depend greatly on the type of work one is doing, and there's going to be a whole class of jobs, you know, careers where you're going to be going in. I'm not sure I could have bent iron remotely.
Interesting question. Mark Giuliani.
I think that the conference rooms will get changed drastically because people are going to want more personal space. And as they increase the size of the conference rooms, they will already be investing in redoing them. So they'll come up with much better audio and visual capabilities, just because that's going to be the way that things have been set up and the way that we're going from just looking at the call here that we have today.
So I don't see any of their hands raised, so we're going to move on to the next question, and it comes to us from Gabriel Ung in Malaysia, and he says, when the panel talks about production in the cloud, is it correct to assume that most of the heavy lifting, like Zoom meetings, vMix, and so forth, are done on multiple virtual machines in the cloud, and our local PCs are only used for monitoring and control? Who are our network topology experts? Rupert McRae is going to weigh in, and then Greg Gibson.
Yeah, I think that's typically the case when we're talking about these scenarios. It's exactly that. We're running vMix or whatever tools in the cloud, and then just using exactly that, just our local machines as viewers to what's going on in the cloud. It's also important to remember that these services that we're using are also based in the cloud. You know, I think if you look up some of the articles, you'll find that Zoom runs on AWS. So the closer you can keep that stuff together up there, the better.
Do I remember Mark having his hand up before Greg? Mark, did you have something to add? No, okay, so it was Greg Gibson, and then Talak, and then Jeffrey. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. And I had an event earlier this week where we were running, I don't know, 12 or 14 machines. We had six Zoom rooms running. We had 4 instances of vMix. We had a PowerPoint machine, and it was all those were all distributed on multiple machines in the cloud. Now, I also distribute that load across some of my local machines as well. So I don't try to run 14 virtual machines on one machine. So I had maybe 7 or 8, particularly like the Zoom instances were running on one particular machine. I had my vMix instances distributed on a couple of other local machines. But yeah, that's exactly, you know, just think of the cloud as an extension of just your network. So all the things that you can do on your local network, you can do it in the cloud, because you can just scale it much larger. And I lost my last point, but if I think of it, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, pop your hand up if you do. Talak is next, then Jeffrey, and then Leo. Go ahead.
I wanted to very quickly say that, you know, if you think about the fact that Zoom works as well as it does, it's because it's in the cloud, and it is connected to its own reflectors across really high bandwidth pipes, and they pay. AWS pays for that, and then Zoom pays for that. And so what we're doing when individual production people leverage the cloud is we're tapping into those really high bandwidth connections between between the different points in the cloud that we are actually leveraging to use for production. So it speeds everything up. And then we just have to look at how we're getting individual contributions in, which we might use things like Zoom.
Okay, Jeffrey, then Leo, then Greg. Good, Jeffrey.
I'll play devil's advocate here because, in perfect environment, yeah, the cloud's going to be perfect to send everything back and forth to. But when you have a problem, it's going to be a big problem. It's just going to just completely hit what you're doing. So it's important to make sure that you have something local that can do somewhat of the job that you can do up on AWS. So that way, if everything just fails there, you have a failover to go to and work from there. With that said, there are certain things, if there's a lot of production that's more in-house than it is all virtual, then it's better to kind of reel some of that stuff in and be able to control the environment.
Leo, Greg, and then Jeffrey, and then Rupert, but very quickly, guys. Oops, you're muted, Leo.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm just on a cloud machine at the moment, give you a real world example. I just ran a speed test on an AWS box that I've got here. It's 3,000 meg download and 3,000 meg upload. And that machine is running on that machine has 64 gig of RAM and just unbelievable amounts of other processing power, and I pay $1 an hour for it. So yes, you use it for the time you need to use it. But you just, as others are saying, I could actually process stuff so much faster on that than I can actually deliver on other things, and I use that's running vMix.
Okay, very quickly, Greg Gibson, then Rupert McRae.
Yeah, Bill, it's a lot reminded me of what I was going to say. So I'm in the Northern Virginia data center. And so there's a lot of very prominent companies that have a presence in the Northern Virginia data center. So I get really good connections to places like Zoom, to YouTube, vMix Call. I get fantastic connections to vMix Call, even if I have to turn off direct peer-to-peer where I'm using their turn server so that I'm running my vMix callers through the vMix server and then back to me. Jeffrey actually makes a really good point. And one of the things that I really wanted to do when I set up my cloud presence was I had people say, hey, we can just set it up for you and then you can just use it. I didn't want to do that. I actually wanted to learn how to set it up myself, because if I ever had a problem, I wasn't going to be able to call one of those guys to fix it for me. And if you do have a problem with a machine in the cloud, it's not a matter of just leaning over and pushing a button on it. If you have a machine hang up in the cloud and you have to force stop it, it's going to take maybe 10 or 15 minutes to get that machine to reboot. So, you do need to keep those things in mind, and also have some backup plans in place if you encounter an issue.
To your point about co-location, or at least being located near the switch or some fast access, I don't think I'll ever be able to live in a house without fiber or something equivalent now. I've gotten so used to this quick up and down speed that when you drop back, you feel really like your whole life is just in molasses.
And as Leo said, with his speeds, sometimes people ask me where I live. I tell them I'm 1 millisecond from the Northern Virginia data center. So I gauge my location on how far I am from the AWS data center. But I typically see connections, upload and download speeds in the 4 gigabit to 4.5 gigabit up and down. So it's really insane. And then it's 25 gigabits machine to machine on the base level account. So
man, I thought I was doing good with 1 gigabit. You're making me feel like a pauper here. Real quick with Rupert, then we're going to move on because we've got a lot of questions still in the queue.
So when it comes to like the routing and the efficiency and the round trip time, it kind of reminds me of the old days of the telecom industry and call routing. If you had a call going from A to B, but maybe it had been transferred to C first, and the call went through, but it actually was still routing through C. The efficient thing would be to switch it in route, so you didn't have that big loop in the middle. And they used to call that anti-tromboning, which means your signal's got to go all the way to where it was routed to, and then all the way back to somewhere else that it's going. And it's kind of similar. If you're doing things locally, you've got to pull all those signals down and then push them all back up again. And really what you should be doing is anti-tromboning in the cloud.
I have a new term of art. I love that. Thank you. Moving on. The next question comes from Nick Gutfriend of Bedford, New York. He says, I have a dying 2015 5K iMac. Does the panel think an M1 Mini can replace it? He drives 2 monitors, drives a camera, mic, and so forth. So Carl Asmussen and then Ken Jordan. Go ahead, Carl.
It shouldn't be a problem. There may be some third-party software that's on its way to be translated to M1, but 2 monitors, you can run a 6K and a 4K off the M1 Mac Mini. Cameras like ATEMs and that kind of stuff will work perfectly fine as well. But it's just going to be third-party software, so you may just want to do a quick search and make sure that if there's any critical software you need maybe for work, works on the M1 right now.
Ken Jordan.
Yeah, someone who's made that transition. My beautiful 5K iMac is up there. The biggest thing I was missing was the 5K screen, but there is one way around that, which is, well, it's quite an expensive way, but the XDR monitor plugged into my M1, yeah, there's no going back to the 5K iMac with that setup.
All right. Well, there's been a tectonic shift in our office hours universe because Courtney Gooden has ordered a Canon EOS M50 MkII to use as an office hours camera and wants to know if it's possible to power it off the USB micro jack when using HDMI out. Congratulations, Courtney, on the coming new rig. Let's go to Carl and then Charles and then Greg. Go ahead, Carl.
So with all Canon photography cameras, they all need dummy batteries, Courtney. So a dummy battery is the way you need to go. The USB is simply data out. It's not power in. So the batteries get charged in an external charger. You can't charge a battery inside the camera, which is kind of a good thing. You don't want it blowing up in there if it does have a leak or a third-party battery. But yeah, so you will need to like my camera right now that I'm using, my Canon DSLR dummy battery. This one is USB, so it's quite nice. You just needs 2 amps, so maybe like a tablet charger, so a 2 amp charger. But yeah, so this one's off USB. You can there's even a DTAP version from this band. So if you want to run off a DTAP, you can even do that.
See, now I feel better, Carl. You had not given me any graphics for this entire part of my hosting shift, and now I feel like everything is okay. We're moving on, and I can't remember. Well, Courtney, I want you to weigh in since it's your question and ask more things for people.
Well, it was just a technical question that I noticed that the wonderful presentation, and Carl, this is your fault for telling me to get the Canon. But the picture that you showed it had a USB as the power source. So is it up converting to 7.5 volts from the 5 volts?
That's right. That's a little box there. So it just needs 2 amps. So it needs a 2 amp 5 volt, and the little box there will be doing a little transformer. You're correct about that. There are some other brands. So B&H has 14 or 15 of them. B&H has a few different variants of this one that comes with the the power brick, depending on your location. US will be fine. There is a DTAP version of this that'll take 12 volt and convert it to the dummy battery voltage. So yeah, check out this brand and their versions of their dummy batteries. But I thought I'd show this one as a basic one because it's just USB, most common. But yeah, there are different versions of ways to get from DTAP and USB are the most common ones for this particular battery. My one needs a bit more power.
And it doesn't come with those.
No.
Okay.
And Canon don't make a dummy battery either.
Why am I suddenly interested in doing a research on weird company names? That was Gyro Views. That's fascinating. Ken Jordan, you had a hand up earlier. Are you okay, or do Greg Gibson has his hand up? Let's go to Greg. Okay, fair enough.
So I'm not going to disagree with Carl that using the dummy batteries is not the better way to go, but I'm actually running my camera right now on USB power. And what it does is trickle charge. And the way I do it is I have to start with a battery that has at least 50% charge. And as long as I have a battery in it that's at least 50% charge, I'll get a full day of use out of it. So it will eventually run down over time, but I can run this thing for 15 hours just right off the USB.
Which brand of camera is that, Greg?
That's a Sony A7R III.
Yeah, so Sony's charge battery in the camera. Canon do not charge battery in the camera. So there's no way to get power into the camera ever, with the exception of battery.
All right. Moving on, let's move to Rupert McQuay's question out of Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says, AT&T is moving its 5G core network to the Microsoft cloud. In turn, Microsoft will gain AT&T's technology to grow its flagship telecom operating, Azure for operators. Could we see a Microsoft Teams 5G device in the future? Ooh, this is nice and speculative here. And I'm not seeing any hands out of the panel, so maybe we don't have anyone today. Well, Rupert's going to take a stab at it. Go ahead, Rupert.
I was really asking for opinions. It came from a press release. If anybody wants to go out there and read it, I mean, I read it and really didn't understand what they're trying to do. So I was just
it's interesting. It seems like
taking a
people are
guess.
positioning themselves to this rollout of millimeter wave, where they're seeing the 5G eventually has the capacity, if you're close enough and don't have walls between you and that cellular signal, which is more difficult with millimeter wave, I understand, than it is with regular Wi-Fi and things like that. I wonder if everybody on those big company sides are just seeing that as eventually a much faster, much more robust wireless future, and they're positioning themselves for it. I don't know any more than that. Courtney, you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think this software deal was for back office, telecom back office software, which is used by the telecom operators. I don't think it really has any consumer-facing stuff as far as rolling out a consumer product. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see how the infrastructure develops over the next 10 years. Rupert McRae is, no, I'm sorry, Douglas Carmichael's up next. And he says, the two DAWs, digital audio workstations I use, the PreSonus Studio One, along with the Bitwig Studio, do not support spatial audio at all. With the rise of Atmos as the de facto standard, do you think I should switch DAWs for fear of being left behind as spatial audio becomes mainstream? Carl Asmussen has his hand up. Go, Carl.
If you're interested in spatial audio, Logic is going to be your destination. And come later in the year, if Atmos is just rolled into Logic rather than having to pay for the plugin, then even better. But at the moment, Logic would be a destination if you're truly interested in mastering in Atmos.
Charles Klein.
Actually, second what Carl said, in our studio, we have a suite that's in Logic and one that is in Fairlight, just because we have to do a lot of color and sound. So we do that naturally there. But yeah, Logic will be, I feel, the number one choice. And then after that, Fairlight.
Fair enough. Moving on, Rupert McRae is back from Dallas with another question. Next month's SMPTE is hosting, quote, a real-world perspective to migrating media and entertainment into the cloud, close quote. Blackmagic is an event sponsor. This is a paid event or free for SMPTE members, and that's the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers here in the U.S. Professional SMPTE membership is about $165 a year. Is it worth it, he wants to know, and Carl will weigh in.
This could be the launch event for Blackmagic 2110.
Oh, you think this is going to be the big one, huh? Interesting. All right.
It could be. I'm interested in just joining up, get my free membership for a few days just to watch it.
A lot of my Los Angeles friends are part of the SMPTE organization there. And it's been interesting to watch it come out of its old, SMPTE was purely engineers back in the early days of television, but boy, it seems like it's expanded. I know editors and other people now who maintain SMPTE memberships because the information passed along is valuable to them. But that's what I hear from my friends. Roscoe has a hand up. Go ahead, Roscoe.
If you have a friend that's a SMPTE member, then they can usually bring one plus one, and they rarely check cards or anything at the gate. So sometimes you can just go to the event.
There you go. That's cool. All right. Moving on. Keenan Campbell, Princeton, Illinois is our next question. Currently designing a new emergency operations center. Cool, Keenan. What's the panel's recommendation for a 40 or 46 foot wide video wall with associated hardware and servers to run said video wall? Do we have any large scale facilities integrators present today? I'm not seeing any hands up. Rupert and Carl will both take a shot at it. Go, Rupert.
Not my space specifically, but I would try and keep it modular, and I'd build in 3 layers of redundancy. If you're in that kind of environment, you cannot afford for that to go down, and you would want to test whatever failover situations you've got, test it regularly.
Yeah, public safety, not something to mess with. Go ahead, Carl.
As far as the panels themselves, yeah, the Sony LED panels are probably one of the better ones to look at. There's a first generation, which would be a lot cheaper now. The second generation got announced last January.
Do you remember what the difference is? Is just higher pitch for the
pitch rate? Yeah, it's pitch rate.
Yeah, that's what's happening most of them. Tlaloc, do you have?
Yeah, I think you just need to look at, you probably know this already, but you got to look at how close will your viewers be? And then the further away they are, the bigger the pitch can be, and the closer they are, the smaller it needs to be, and the more expensive it will be.
And also, Alex weighs in on this topic a lot and has very firm opinions on it. So you might want to bring the question back when Alex is in the host chair, and maybe he'll wax at more length and give you better information about it. Not that this was bad information at all. Let's move on. Douglas. Oh, I'm sorry, Roscoe Jones. No one mentions email anymore for productivity. Why is that? This is an interesting question, having just dealt with the fact that I have more young people in my life because of my son's peers than ever before. And it's weird when you say I'm going to email and they look at you like, really? Let's go with Rupert McRae and then Charles Klein.
So, we have all these instant messaging tools now. So I think just in some cases, the nomenclature promotes itself to something being more instant than email really is. But also from a back-end point of view, as an administrator, an email transaction is quite a heavyweight protocol. For simple words and simple line items, single sentences, a lot has to happen relatively for that to happen. So it's quite heavyweight for that.
Does anybody else have the same feeling I do? The velocity of my streams is a lot lower in email than it is in anything else. So if I have incoming information, an attached script or a video or something, I can find it more easily even today through email than I can through the other services. But let's Charles Klein, Jesse Schwartz, and then we'll go to Ken Jordan. Go ahead, Charles.
It was nice when it first came out because the only other option was mailing a letter, handwritten. But if you need to contact somebody right now and you have to do it by email, you're probably not in the inner circle of things. Like right now, if you're trying to find me, you should text me or find me on Discord. If you're not in there, I'm probably not going to see the message you sent me because my producer might not get back to me.
There you go. I think it was Courtney, then Ken. I may be out of order.
I think, sorry to jump in.
Oh, well, Jesse, were you next?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I actually feel kind of strongly about this. I wanted to get my point in that email has been overloaded with junk mail. So I will miss things in email, and I'm sure other people will too. So if I have a critical communication, I'd rather do it on text or Discord, like Charles is mentioning. It's almost like your mailbox. When I open up the physical mailbox now, my daughter sort of loves doing it. It's filled with junk, and there's almost never anything relevant that comes via email. And I feel like, we've been spammed to death where email now is not a good critical form of communication.
Let's do Ken, then Courtney, then Nigel. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, as much as I dislike email myself, looking at my box here, I've got 162,000 unopened emails. It still does work from a marketing and an emailing out messages point of view. As much as I rail against it, it still does have a high enough traction and a low cost in terms of for using as a marketing tool.
Courtney?
I didn't grow up in the texting generation, and a lot of the, Generation X and Generation Y's, that's all the only way they communicated, so they will communicate via text. In my company, almost all incoming bookings come via email. And I get so many junk calls on the telephone, spam calls on the telephone, that I'd say 90% of the calls I get on the telephone are spam calls. So nobody calls me anymore. They all book via email, and I have to watch my inbox religiously. And I know what the problem is with Ken. I go through every morning and delete all the spam. So I just leave the stuff of the pertinent clients in there. But it's good for a couple of things. One is it stays a resident. So if somebody said, "Oh, I emailed you 3 weeks ago, I sent you those scripts," and I went, "Oh, you did? Let me go look back through my inbox, and I'll find it, and it's there." Whereas a call or a text, if there's an attachment or something, it may not be there.
Nigel, and then Rupert. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, there are some legal things that are still doable by email that are not doable by text and other types of messaging. So contractually, it's easier, it's more discoverable, all those sorts of things. The upside of email, for all its downsides, is too much of other communication has become a continuous conversation that people can't step aside from. An email slightly has the advantage that it's not a continuous conversation. And it's sometimes this technology is overtaking people's lives.
I actually agree with that. That's what I experienced too. Rupert, do you want to make a quick comment before we move on?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when things go wrong in a corporate or business environment, and somebody asks for an investigation and everything has to be gone through, email is the easiest system to do that. And if you're having to like audit trail some conversation that happened in Slack or something else, that it can be done, but it's just a pain.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. All right, moving on. Douglas Carmichael, the major cloud providers have machine translation services. Would real-time translation, and by that he means captions, panelists, be useful to expand the audience for office hours as it grows? And we've done tests on that. In fact, months and months and months ago, I'm trying to remember who it was. One of our regulars installed a captioning live system. On the banks of the Shiawassee River. Leland put live captioning into the office hours stream. It was listening to us and it was translating in real time and captioning us, and it worked really well. We haven't gone back to it, but it was around. Let's talk to John Preto and then Ken Jordan. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, Leland's on our crew, and we use that for our events when people ask for it. And he uses Google, one of the Google products that translates in real time, and then he scrapes that into vMix.
Ken Jordan.
Yeah, early in the pre-show, Alex was talking about it with Laura, so watch this space. We will be looking at that.
Changes yet to come. Very cool. All right, moving on to the next question. Rupert McRae here on the panel and from Dallas. A tech startup has raised $10 million in funding for their platform that replaces resumes with skills tests, remotely assessing cognitive abilities, soft skills, job skills, culture, and motivation. Might production employers ever use something like this? Ooh, that's a delicate question. Charles, then Carl.
I've seen that in some tech companies like Apple or Google, stuff like that, where you go through levels of interviews and they will make you do something right there, like to problem solve something, which is going to let them know how you think, how you process and everything. But for productions, I've never looked at hiring somebody from their resume. I looked at Reels, but it mostly comes from somebody else has said, oh, this person can do the job. A referral from somebody that I trust, and that history, I don't think there's something more valuable than that, for me at least. For our industry, it's, can you do the job? I'm not concerned if you can type a resume.
Carl?
If a production company is big enough and they outsource their human resourcing, no doubt that human resourcing will do these vetting, this style of vetting. But generally, if a production company is small enough, like a lot of the production companies we get involved with, it's word of mouth and you show reel, and maybe how this person's worked on another set, and they've seen them work on that set and how they behave on that set.
Ken Jordan.
Yeah, just as an aside, just because a tech startup managed to raise money is more of an issue of people with the money just looking for next hot thing. Not necessarily means it's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm going to weigh in on this a little. I remember being in corporate life, and when the Myers-Briggs thing came through, and everybody in every corporation was being asked to take those personality assessments, and it was very weird. I mean, people test in different ways on different subjects, and different things get them upset. And some people like to write, some people like to work on a computer, some people just want a conversation with you and look you in the eye. So I'm always askance at any one instrument as the final arbiter of whether this person's going to be a good fit. I think at some point you have to both do the assessment and also have to sit across a desk from them or get them on site and just see how they behave. Jesse, your thoughts?
Yeah, of course, referrals are always desired, but especially for young people that might not have a professional network. And if you're applying for something graphical like animation, a reel is very important. So a digital portfolio of what you can do is usually paramount, even with a referral.
Yeah, and I'm gonna make a statement that I wrote in an article decades ago about doing demo reels, and that is be careful. You just list, if you put things on your reel or on your promo material, indicate what you did there, because if I see a fabulous spot from somebody and I think, wow, they can produce something like that, and it turns out what they did was the credits at the end of it, I will not be upset if I'm hiring them to do credits But if I'm hiring them to build the spot and they don't have those skills, you're essentially saying I can do work that I can't do. And I think that's deadly, because once you get into a situation where you're hired and you fail because you really didn't have the chops that your real implied you had, that's deadly for reputation. Charles, then Peter Sargent.
Sorry, just to that point, Bill, I mean, a skilled interviewer does have the obligation when they look at it to ask the person what their role in the project was. So even though people are not always upfront, or maybe it's just they don't get it, that they need to explain their role, it can be sort of worked through in the interview process.
Fair enough. Charles Klein, then Peter Sargent.
That has been a very big issue that we've had when people send in their reels, that you never know if they did the modeling or the lighting or the texturing, or they just happen to be an assistant and they happen to get a credit on it. So if you're the interviewer, usually it helps to be the one that has some experience in the field, so you can get past those two first levels of questions, because somebody that did the job will be able to dig down 6, 7 levels into how you solve that problem. But that usually comes from the interviewer knowing the process deep down.
Fair enough. Peter Sargent.
Well, obviously, my background is a little different than, this kind of role, but we've often used, both in my, prior employer and my current employer, we resume gets you in the door, the interview is helpful, and then we give them a case study. Here, go read this for 30 minutes, come back and tell us how you would address it, and talk to us, right? To see how they will work through, see how their mind works.
Yeah, and then this is, of course, going to change depending on the level that you are hiring for. I mean, if you're hiring for a PA, I just was talking to somebody online the other day, and they said, I need to ask this question because it came up in a job interview yesterday and I don't know it. And my response to them was, there's nothing wrong with not knowing things. You can research things and learn. It's how you deal with that. In fact, the ability to raise your hands and say, I'm not great at this, I need some research or help, is something I think is a positive. It's saying that you're humble enough to keep learning and not trying to pretend you know everything. And I that's 10 points on my book right there.
Yeah, we've used the Kobayashi Maru scenario a few times where there actually is no right answer, just to see how people react.
Right. And yeah, do they get frustrated, or do they get too scared, or do they get energized and talk it through? Sometimes that's the big difference right there. All right, and we're going to move on to the next question, because I don't see any other hands. Oops, excuse me about that. We're going to go on to Nick Gutfriend of Bedford, New York, who says, when you discuss screen scraping, does the panel mean using video and or audio out of a given device? And are there recommended tools for doing that? Carl.
Yeah, so for instance, we talk a lot about it with Mac Minis. If we're going to take a participant, let's say from a Zoom room. So we're just simply taking the HDMI out or the video out, which will be probably converted to HDMI and put into something like hardware. Technically, you can also screen scrape into NDI, which we had a great discussion about yesterday with Zoom rooms as well. So NDI is another way to screen scrape.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yeah, technically this show is being screen scraped right now, right in front of me, because that's where the machine is. So you could do, and there's a lot of different ways. NDI, you can use OBS, you can use Wirecast, you can use Ecamm, you can use anything. And now they're even working on ways to do it where you don't even need a software switcher. Like NVIDIA and AMD have external software that can bring it in, so you can either use it for a live stream or a Zoom call or anything like that.
Clark.
Just a reminder that if you have any kind of switcher, it's just an HDMI cable that you need, because you're coming from your computer, going into the switcher, and then pulling that feed in. And that's how a lot of people are presenting their graphics, etc. now in this meeting. And Carl just made an example of that right there. And if you want, you can also send your output of your switcher back to a monitor, and then you can have all kinds of workflow there as well.
Let's go to Richard, then Rupert.
Yeah, one of the things in the question is asking also about audio, and often when we screen scrape a panelist or a contributor, remote guest, we're taking the video, but we're putting the audio, an example of Zoom, into something else like a mixer, or through Dante into a larger mixer. So we're splitting those kind of two signals up, just because of quality and control.
Rupert McRae.
So like screen scraping to me was always like the second choice. Is something you use when you don't have access to the raw video signal, you just scrape the screen. So I'd just be interested to hear everybody's thoughts on where is the line between a good signal and having to use a screen scrape.
I'm just going to talk from personal experience. I do this a good little bit for clients, and remarkably, just QuickTime, which is built into every Mac, QuickTime Pro allows you to do a screen capture, and you can drag out a rectangle that is the size of the display on your screen. And I have literally just captured from that, usually using audio hijack or something similar to make a secondary recording of the audio if that pathway is not clear. And I've used that in corporate video over and over again, and they love the quality. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a second-class citizen. If your machine and your system is passing good quality video, screen scraping can get you a good quality signal. Jeffrey, go ahead.
Yeah, and the reality is until we're streaming at RAW, getting a raw signal in to stream in 1080p, you can use it for your recording, absolutely, but it's still going to end up in 1080 or 720 or maybe even 4K, but not much more.
Okay, moving on to Douglas Carmichael, who says, I've asked this before in the past, but what does everyone think about subscription plans like the PreSonus Sphere? I currently have my Bitwig and Waves update plans paid until 2024, and Sphere looks very appealing for what you get for the monthly price. Carl wants to talk about this. Go ahead, Carl.
If there's a piece of technology, so if there's a plugin that has a library in it as well, so the PreSonus has like a library that you can have as well, so sample library. If there's technology in there that you really need for a project and it doesn't come with your Waves or any other subscriptions you have and it's worth it for you, then yeah, get it. But if you just want to use it as like you're collecting stamps, then there may be other ways, other better ways to spend your money for creative purposes rather than just collecting stamps as far as plugins and libraries.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about this from a different perspective. I had an old hard drive that was having trouble. I needed to recover it, and I looked out, and it had been formatted under APFS, the newest of the Apple systems. So a lot of the old recovery programs didn't seem to work. So the only thing I could find was a subscription program. I am so leery of subscriptions in that type, particularly small vendors of utilities. My experience in the past has been you will subscribe and then you will find it hard to get out of the subscription. And it will sometimes keep hitting your credit card or whatever payment process you do over and over again. So my standard process now is to go out to the drugstore, find a plain vanilla type Visa card, put my subscription on that, knowing that if at the end of the month, I don't put more money on that card, they're not going to be able to get more money. And surprisingly, they're always able to terminate your subscription if they're not getting paid for it. That's just been my experience. Jeffrey?
The one thing that I've found that's really cool, and it just actually happened to me the other day. I have a subscription to Yoast, which is a SEO program for web pages. And they just sent me an email like 6 months in advance saying, hey, if you subscribe now, if you extend now, we're going to give you an additional 25% off. And it's not just that, but they can, there'll be Black Friday sales and stuff like that. Well, you'll be able to get your subscription. A lot of us got our Waves subscription through Black Friday sales as well. But there's always going to be opportunity to get it for less and still keep the updates, all the current, the software current as you go.
Ken Jordan.
Yeah, just a quick thing for Jeffrey with his Yoast subscription. Yeah, you should have a chat. I could save you a lot from you needing to use that and getting better SEO. But on a subscription with a virtual or a number of virtual cards, so you don't have to go to a drugstore in America or chemist shop over here to get a credit card. There are a number of like Revolut is one that I recommend in terms of put subscriptions onto those services, because you can always cancel those virtual cards.
Yeah, I would also suggest, though, make sure maybe you want to talk to your banker, because I had a really surprising conversation about maybe 7 or 8 years ago with my banker, who told me that often these subscriptions come with binding arbitration clauses buried deep in them, where your bank can't even stop your subscription if it's tied to a credit card when you tell them to, because they're not a party to the agreement. You literally have to go through a third party to get the subscription to stop. That is one of the reasons I have been so vehemently anti a certain kind of subscription. Again, I'm not against all subscriptions. There are fair subscriptions and processes that I think they play by the rules and they don't unnecessarily continue the relationship past where you want it. But I'm just very careful about subscriptions. Rupert, you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I'd just be careful with some of the high dollar, high profile subscriptions on the prepaid cards and then just cutting them off, because those contractual obligations are a bit deeper, and some of those fees may go on accruing. So don't think by always just cutting the money off that it's not going to end up in a messier situation a few months later.
Which is why I think an excellent reason why these are more complicated in relationships than we first think. It is usually really easy to hit the subscribe button, and they make that as frictionless as possible. Often there is far more friction on the back end when you find out you're in something you didn't really think through in that immediate circumstance, like my recovery of my hard drive. I needed to get the job done, and I just said, how can I get this finished? And I tried to take a few little firewall steps to prevent it from going bad. All right, we're moving on to the next question. Douglas Carmichael is finished. No, Douglas Carmichael's up next. And he says, spatial audio seems to be first taking hold in the streaming music market, particularly Apple Music. Could immersive audio technologies like L'Acoustics LISA be a similar driver to bring people back to live venues as better audio quality arrives to consumers? And Jesse wants to start us.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough to compete with the level of both picture quality and audio that people can create in their own den or home theater room. So I do feel that for live venues, it's not going to be the technical solution like better audio. I mean, movie theaters already have the most amazing Dolby Atmos, and there's already IMAX screens that have been there for 30 years. So it's not, technology can't solve everything. I think that venues are going to have to focus on something about being with your fellow human that draws you there, not by giving you superior audio.
Courtney?
Yeah, I agree with Jesse. Immersive audio has been around for 20 or 30 years, ever since Apocalypse Now, and I think you have to sit in a sweet spot to really appreciate true Atmos, positional audio. And in a venue, you probably won't be able to. Only 2 or 3 people will be able to sit in the sweet spot.
Jeffrey Powers.
I remember, and maybe a lot of you remember, back in the 70s when air conditioning became a common thing in many people's homes, and people would say, "Oh, people won't go to the movies because now you can watch stuff at home with proper air conditioning." And then we went to flat panel TVs. Oh, people won't go to the movie theaters because you now have a big screen in front of you. Yet my brother just posted a big thing. He went and saw F9 in the theater. And there are people that still want to go out there and still want to go back to the live concerts, just want to go back to the movies. They've been dying to do that. And I think no matter what you throw at it, there's still going to be a level. Will we have a lot of them? Maybe not. But we still have things like drive-throughs, our drive-in theaters. We still have shopping malls. We still have a lot of different things. So I think there's still a need there that we'll gravitate to.
We'll go to Rupert next, but Ken held up a set of the Apple new headphones that do spatial audio. Ken, do you want to just weigh in on how the experience has been for you as a user?
Yeah, I just said it. Yeah, don't need a sweet spot, because when wearing these, I could be anywhere and get them. So it's not a, you don't need to have to spend thousands on speakers and sit in one particular place in your room to experience spatial audio.
And it has
the good thing about these is you don't need a
experience
pocketbook
lived up
either.
to your expectations, Ken?
More so. I was pleasantly surprised at how immersive it is, especially when I can be anywhere walking around, and yeah, it's well, for me anyway. I found it really, really quite good.
Good. Well, Rupert, you had something to say?
Yeah, so I'm trying to find the exact article I read, but as far as I know, there's also going to be some immersive audio productions coming out of the Olympics for whatever reason. So maybe look that up and see what they're doing there.
Ooh, an underwater microphone at the swimming races. That'd be Okay, anyway, moving along to the next question here. It comes from Ken Jones in Seattle. And Ken says, OBS on a Mac Mini with output stream at 6,000 kilobits per second. I see rendering lag up to 5%. Ouch. At 2,000 kilobits per second. Kilobytes per second, bits. No rendering lag. What's the relationship between rendering time and stream speed? And Talak had his hand up, and so did Carl. Let's go to Talak first.
There's been a lot of problems with OBS and Mac in general. So I know that all the people in that open source community are working hard at it, but it's not there yet.
Okay. And Talak, your level's a little low. I don't know if you can boost it at all, but you're coming in quiet. Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, so OBS is good bedfellows with a Windows machine, and Mimo Live is good bedfellows with an Intel Mac machine. So Mimo Live is what you'll hear people on Office Hours talk about if they want the same similar features from a Mac-based platform.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yeah, the biggest problem with OBS right now is it doesn't run a lot of the Mac protocol, especially Metal. They're still on the just escaped. Anyway, for Windows, and I would love to try if somebody's got an M1 that loads Windows on. Try OBS through that and see if there's an actual difference, if it's better, if it works better, or not so much.
Okay, I think we're moving on to the next question, which comes from Douglas Carmichael. And he says, Jesse talked about client presentations as something that would be done in the office. If you teach the skills Office Hours advocates, particularly high quality audio and video, Keynote, PowerPoint, and switching, could a distributed workforce deliver quality presentations? He asks. Let's go to Charles and then Jesse.
I would say whatever sounding yes. A few examples would be, if you look at the Frame.io Michael Cioni presentation that he did for us, he was at home and his coworker was somewhere else, and they did a fabulous presentation with tech on both their sides. Also, our friend Felipe Bias and his colleague, when they did the presentation for the HBO project they did, that was a fabulous presentation. And also, if you look at what we do every day here, and Carl and his fabulous slides that come out of nowhere, I mean, it is definitely possible to have an amazing presentation that then can be distributed, to people all over the world. And it doesn't have to be just concentrated to the people that can make it into the room. So just from a range of how you can expand, who you can reach, I mean, it's immense.
Hear, hear. Carl's next. Then we had another hand up somewhere that I've lost, but Carl, you go ahead. Oh, Jesse. Okay, Carl first.
So yeah, as Charles says, we've had some amazing second hours here with some companies coming in from multiple locations doing these presentations. And I think every day on Office Hours, we're trying to lift our game as well, especially when we have a guest in the second hour. We try to lift our game and help them lift their game too.
Yeah, it's actually a good point, because we've seen now what it can be. And boy, when it works well, as both of those examples that Charles gave, when it works well, it works really well. Jesse, what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, so I knew when I made the comment about coming into the office for client presentations that it was going to trigger people thinking that I'm advocating that that is superior to a virtual presentation. I don't feel that way, and each has their benefits. And I think we've made very clear cases here as to how you could do a better presentation virtually. Part of it being what Carl said, you can bring people in from all over the world that you couldn't do physically. But I come from an architecture environment, and there's times where you have to have in-person meetings, if nothing else, but for the client to see you in the flesh, to see your office, to see that you have 30 people in your office, so it could just be a kickoff meeting. It could be at a periodic point in the process. Maybe the presentation will be worse than what could have been done virtually, but in-person meetings still have their place. They're still going to happen. Yes, it's a changing world, but everything in the old world doesn't just disappear. There's still a need for that kind of thing.
Rupert.
So you can kind of visualize some one-on-one interactions there if you've got a client, you want to meet with them. But sometimes, either party may have some additional representatives that want to join. You may have an advisor from here, a producer from somewhere else, an architect from somewhere else, and you're going to need to pipe them in possibly to that meeting. So they're going to need a great experience too. So even if you're doing it locally, you've got to give them a great experience also.
Yeah, I mean, then that's a hybrid, which is more difficult, but you're right. There's more and more, there's increasingly the need to bring somebody into that meeting that can't physically be there. So it's certainly challenging, and it's fun to figure out. I mean, hybrid events are the hardest. I like to try and figure out hybrid stuff personally.
Charles?
To second what Jesse said, my fiance is in fashion and interior design, and there are some things that he said, for example, to picking out textures and the way that materials feel to the client. Those are all things that throughout the pandemic, they've had to go in and be very careful. But for the other presentations, they've been able to show 3D renderings and layouts and floor maps and everything from the comfort of their home. But when it came to picking out materials, that had to obviously be done all in person.
And the most compelling reason of all, I come out of Phoenix and Scottsdale, and every year at Christmas time, Mr. Rios' mother used to make tamales, and I am not giving that up without a fight. So it's the communal table, everybody contributing to, that I miss probably most of all. All right, let's move on. Jasmine Lee of Singapore is next. I'm going to attempt my first event on 24, which is streaming to Facebook Live. Is there anything in particular I should look out for? Jasmine, let's see if we can help you. And Ken's going to start us off.
Yeah, I would highly recommend, as Alex always says, is to do practices before. If you're on Discord, you can, I'm sure many of the office hours people on Discord will gladly pop into your test versions to try it out. So that's the best way of really, well, in my opinion, the best way of learning it is practicing and using some of this office hours crew to help you with that.
Is On24 significantly different than the other platforms that we talk about here a lot? Does anybody have experience with more than one of them? I just have never talked to somebody who's used it, so I don't know whether or not it's solid or just another. Well, hopefully you'll have a great experience regardless. So it looks like we're moving on to the next question. It comes from Gabriel Ung in Malaysia, a common questioner here. My internet service provider provides home users with 1 gigabit per second upload and download at much affordable rates compared to corporate rates. What are the key differences between home and corporate packages that could affect live streaming productions? And let's start with Greg, then go to Peter Sargent.
Yeah, primarily what you're going to get in that corporate level agreement is you're going to get something called a service level agreement, or an SLA, which is something that you would want to have. And what an SLA does is it's going to give you some amount of guaranteed uptime, typically 99% uptime. And then if you do have an issue, those higher paying corporate accounts with those service level agreements are going to be the first ones restored if you do have an outage.
Peter?
I was going to say almost exactly the same thing, but I do pay for a commercial circuit into my house because it gives me a 2-hour response time if something breaks, and it has broken. I've had a tree take down the circuit, and they were out in 2 hours. Whereas a year and a half ago, had a similar problem happen, and it took 24 hours plus to get my internet access back. So you pay for the service level agreement, not the actual bandwidth in that case. I mean, it's significantly higher.
So your place in the line matters. Rupert McRae.
Yeah, very similar to what's already been said. But on the residential services, you're quite often dealing with what they call contention ratio, which is you're sharing your bandwidth with your other people on your segment. Quite often in the commercial space, you're going to get a 1-to-1 ratio, which means that bandwidth is assigned to you and nobody else could share it another time. That's particularly important during peak times. Residential services can slow down when everybody's watching the same thing in the neighborhood or whatever. On the commercial side, the SLA stuff is really important. I've been in situations where maybe if you have multiple circuits, you can build a relationship with the vendor. They'll go show you their network operations center and you get a relationship there. And if you have a problem, you know who to call.
Roscoe.
Can we only get static IPs on the corporate side? Is that one of the features that you very hard to find, or are they hard to get anywhere?
Greg has an answer for that. Then we'll go to Peter and then Rupert after that. Greg, go ahead.
To quote Mickey, it depends, Roscoe. I mean, they can all be a little bit different, and some of them might come with a static IP, and then some of them may charge additional for a static IP.
Peter?
Well, two things. One is exactly what Greg just said. I do not have a static IP. I just happen to know it hasn't changed in 6 months, but it's not static, right? But the other thing is, I would, Rupert, I would wonder, because I'm on fiber to the home, and I think I go straight back to the central office, and I don't think they changed the fiber run. They just changed the SLAs in that case.
It can still slow down when everybody's watching broadband in the 7 o'clock.
Yeah, but I'm not sharing anybody on the same circuit on my street.
Rupert, you have the floor. Go for it.
Yeah, so on the static IP front, some residential services will not allow you to get a static IP, period. Some will offer it as an optional add-on. But with a commercial circuit, that's a conversation that they'll open up with you generally as part of your order, and they'll discuss that with you, and that'll all be scoped out.
Now, this is a hole in my knowledge, because I've heard the term static IP, and I understand that's critical in this. Can somebody give me the explain it like I'm five version of the different types of connections and why a static IP is more superior to a variable one? Go ahead, Rupert.
So it really all comes down to whether you're hosting resources on your network that you need to access reliably from external. If you're going to be doing port forwarding or VPNs or stuff like that, it's a lot like how things work on your internal network. You may have DHCP, and your devices may pick up different IP addresses when they boot up. Internet connections is just the same. When your modem starts up, you get an IP address on the internet, a live IP that will likely change over time. Randomly maybe, or whatever, or at whatever window your ISP chooses. Now, if they give you a static IP, that stays the same always, so you know how to address your internet connection, your network from outside via a reliable fixed IP address.
Leo has something to add, and so does Greg. And then Jeff.
Yeah, so also static IP addresses are very good for if you want to get your, especially when you're sending emails in the past, to get your email whitelisted and to get to rate your quality of your IP. You can pick up an IP address. I've picked up ones in the past that have had very poor ratings, and you get slammed for it. But in general terms, there is no difference between a static and a dynamic IP address in terms of actually the speed that it works at or the connection or anything like that. It's just about how long has that address been linked to that physical point.
Greg?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's really, in a lot of ways, just a convenience factor. Like, for example, I don't have a static IP on my fiber line, and it does change periodically. I had one IP that I had for like over a year. Then I had one that lasted me about a month, and the one that I have right now I've been on for about 2 months. But every time my IP address changes, for example, I have to go into my security groups in AWS. I have to change my IP address in my security groups inside of AWS. I use vMix Social a lot, and I do port forwarding on vMix Social to allow my clients access to vMix Social on my local machines. And so I have to give them a different IP address for vMix Social when it changes. So it's more a convenience factor, but as Leo was saying, it doesn't really affect performance.
Jeffrey, and then we'll finish up with Rupert.
Well, the bottom line is that it's just like if you walk into an office building, either you're a guest, static IP, where you have to go to the front desk to get the information to get up to where you need to go, or you have a dynamic IP where you already have a key card, you walk in, you go to where you need to go. There's always going to be that extra handshake that goes on when you need to get something dynamic versus static. I think I've mixed that around, but you get the idea.
Rupert has the last comment, and we'll move on.
Yeah, so just an important distinction. All this discussion has been about assuming you have one IP. Now, if you need a range of IP addresses because you're running a lot of complex internal services and you want to address things differently, then that is inevitably going to be fixed. You've got to at least start with one fixed IP and then build on from there. You really can't have a range of dynamic IPs from an ISP.
Okay. Thank you. That helps me understand more about it. And hopefully somebody else in our audience had the same lack of knowledge filled. Let's move on. David Brady of New York is our next questioner. If and when I need to reboot my ATEM Extreme, my MacBook Pro 2019 connected to IN3 freaks out, panics, and reboots. It's connecting through IO Gear's GUD3C05 dock. Any idea what might be the cause? CEC or some other thing? And Carl has his hand up.
So the answer is most likely in the question. So any streaming appliance like an ATEM or an audio interface, they want to be connected directly to a computer and not through a dock. Docks are good for like packet devices like hard drives and those kind of things. So my first suggestion would be plug your ATEM directly into the computer with no dock in between. Docks and ATEMs just sometimes don't play nice.
Peter Sargent has added information.
Yeah, to add what he said, what gentleman said, it is, I mean, I know because every once in a while, and I think we've all experienced this, the ATEM Mini, or in my case, the Extreme, will sometimes lose its mind and the camera will go black for no particularly good reason. And I unplug the power in the back and I plug it back in. But when I do that, my Mac Pro, which is where the ATEM, which is where everything is plugged into, all three screens go black for a moment while it rethinks what's going on. And then it all comes back. But I'm connected straight into my Mac Pro. So I will bet, just like Rupert, that was said, the dock's the villain here. The dock is the villain, is it's not recovering correctly.
And we have heard that for many, many months here. One of the first questions that people ask when USB or other connected devices start giving them problems is, are you using a dock? So it seems like device to dock to computer is less stable kind of generically than device directly to computer. Ken, do you have thoughts?
Well, that'll be a good test because I received yesterday, this is now my 4th OWC dock. This is the Thunderbolt 4 version, which is, I know, by Ken's teeth, difficult to get. So my ATEM is plugged into the dock, which is plugged into my M1. So I'll be interested to see whether I have those issues. I know I had them with the Thunderbolt 3 version of the OWC dock. I did have exactly those kind of issues, but I'll see whether the Thunderbolt 4 version is more stable.
And I think it's fair to say that the panel has always opined, a lot of people here, that OWC makes some of the best docks out there. Not the only ones that are good, but that seems to be the gold standard. So if it's having problems, it looks like it's a generic. If you use these, be a little more careful than if you don't. All right, let's move on. I'm hesitant to note that our regular queue is low on questions, because the last time I said that, I looked over in 5 minutes and we had 14, and I realized that we were never going to get them done. But if a few people have interesting questions, we could use a couple more in the queue. That said, Douglas Carmichael's up next with, when I've been in large public spaces, for example, airports or transit terminals, for example, French language announcements have always been read more quickly and in a female voice. Would there be a specific reason for the female voice and the increased speed? Oh, we have some hands up. Let's start with Jesse and then go to Rupert.
So I can't speak to the increased speed, but as far as the female voice, it's been proven that the mind is more attentive to the female voice. The study I read was for fighter pilots when there are emergency signals that need to be, or emergency instructions that need to be conveyed to them. It's always in a female voice for that reason.
May go to Rupert, then to Locke, and then Courtney. Go ahead, Rupert.
I mean, Jesse had a good answer, because as a married man, I've never been able to figure this out.
Locke?
I'm bilingual, and a lot of times, actually trilingual really, and a lot of times people mention to me that a language sounds fast, and I say it does. And so I don't know if it has to do with mother tongue or not. I'm not sure if that's what's at play in this question, but just remember as well that if it's not your mother tongue, it may sound faster than it actually is.
There you go. Okay, Courtney, good.
Yeah, just repeating what Jesse said, the studies have been done, and you could think it's psychological, so that you're used to hearing commands from your mother. And so that voice kind of cuts through. But I think it's more a technical issue of the vocal range of a female voice is in an upper register, which tends to cut through all of the clutter and noise and hum and things that can be on an audio channel. And they found this a lot when doing dispatching to police radios and so on. They found that a female dispatcher was much more able to cut through the clutter than anything else.
Peter Sargent.
I was actually going to quote Courtney, because I've worked on hardware where we or in systems where we had to do that, including F-22 Raptor emergency controls that Jesse was referring to. Those systems do talk in a high range female voice to get everyone's attention very quickly. Right? I mean, those are they're pre-recorded voices, they're machine generated voices, but there's still a female voice coming in through the headset.
Thank you, Siri. Charles Klein.
Yeah. I grew up in a house speaking multiple languages, and it's a cultural thing. And to anybody that doesn't know the language, especially at first, it sounds a lot faster than it actually is, especially different dialects within the same language. But it's a cultural thing. My parents were mixed and they spoke multiple languages. And it was just, if we had a visitor, we had to slow everything down so they could understand what was happening.
I wonder, colloquially around the family, though, were there shorthands and shortcuts that you didn't? I notice sometimes when I'm reading a script, I will be very formal because that's what it was written in the language. And I'll say, we could cut this down by 30% and say exactly the same thing because they are writing for the eye rather than writing for the ear. Conversations, we tend to, I think, shortcut things. Charles, when you figured out multiple languages, did you see that happening, or was it just the translation?
Yes, but also if you know that everybody speaks multiple languages, you end up jumping from one to the other, and it's something that you just get used to because it might be a more concise way to get the point across in a different language. But also there are certain languages that they are very proud of their language, like French, for example. Like they get through it, they don't skip any vowels or anything like that. They get through everything, but they also live in a large city, so they actually have to get the point across a little faster. But yeah.
Yep, go ahead, Peter Sargent. So they don't have, my point was the knows that we tend to do. You know about that?
Well, the thing I remember doing years ago, because I was fascinated by this, is I was doing a lot of travel in between US and Japan, and I knew they were reading the in-flight emergency announcement that they always read at the beginning of a flight. I took a stopwatch out and I timed them because I knew they were covering the exact same material in two different languages, English and Japanese. Japanese was about 40% longer to get it across. So there is a conciseness to the language, kind of what Charles was talking to. The French, I've noticed traveling between here and Canada, when they do the French language announcements, it's maybe about 20% longer because, again, they're very precise in their language. They're very proud of it, right? And we speaking English, we will massacre the English language without even thinking twice about it.
You think? Okay. Rupert McRae.
I was just wondering whether it might be like percentage of airtime. They've got a primary language and a secondary language, and they've got to get them both done so they can get around again to the next primary language announcement. And there's just so much time, you've got to make some decisions. Maybe
I hope it's not that they're just tired after reading all the English and then they slow down for that. To lock. Yeah,
remember that in Europe there are quite a few more trains than here, and so you have to be able to fit some of this information in. That's thing one. Thing two is this is a formal situation, and so I don't think they're going to be using colloquialisms in any language. It is a formal announcement, and it has to be efficient, and it has to be formal.
Yeah, I've never heard train 5 going to go soon in a train station. It's just not the way it works. Carl Asmussen, go ahead.
So very soon we're going to get a real world example of this. So the Olympics is going to have every announcement in French first, then in the local language, which will be Japanese, and then in English. So every single announcement they make in the Olympics has to be in all three languages every time. So you're actually going to be able to use a Rosetta Stone of sorts for every announcement.
That's going to be fun. And, you're right. That's an absolute real world, perfect example of the differences. And we'll all be able to watch that in real time happen. Let's move on to Daniel Goldstein's question from Washington, D.C. And he asks, what apps do we like to use on an iPhone 12 Pro Max as a webcam? I'd like to be able to control the camera and pan and scan from my 4K lens to 1080. So, Carl.
So I use Filmic Pro. You're asking for something like a Brio. Doesn't really exist outside of the iPad, new iPad with the center stage feature, which is quite amazing, which I've seen demonstrated here on Office Hours. So I would say center stage on an iPad would be where you want to go with that. You may find an app, a third-party app that'll do it on the iPhone, but from what Apple's doing on the iPad Pro, it looks quite amazing.
Carl, could you describe a little of what center stage does? Because people might not be familiar with it.
So essentially what's happened is the front-facing camera, the FaceTime camera on the iPad Pro is the same 12 megapixel camera that we have on the iPhone 12 as well, on the iPhone 12 Pro. So it allows you to actually pan and scan and get out full 1080 in their FaceTime or however you want to use it. And because of that, it allows you to do this, but it's more the movement itself. The movement is very logarithmic. It's not linear. So it's not like it just starts and stops. And it does, if you're to the screen left, it won't reframe you. It'll have a bit of delay. So the attack on the change of image, the framing, the attack that it takes to go to the change of framing is slower. So it'll leave you there on the side of the frame for 5 seconds. If you don't come back to center, then it will reframe you. It won't follow you around like some other systems will.
That's interesting. I wonder if part of that reflects in Final Cut when you do position moves and ease in and ease out is kind of the default behavior. I wonder if they've taken
ease in
that
and
same
ease out. That's what
algorithm.
it's called. Yeah, that's what it's called in like Keynote and any other video app essentially that does this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more like a camera operator would do because it starts slowly, accelerates, and then slows down before it lands, which I think is visually a really pretty kind of solution. We've got Rupert and Talak commenting, so go ahead, Rupert. Oh, not Talak. Okay, you're just. Yeah.
Does anybody know if the NDI cam for iPhone would accept the remote PTZ signals over? Like Jeffrey's shaking his head, so it won't.
Oh, I thought you meant for the movement, but I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, and I think more and more things. I mean, everybody that I know, when they want to get into the higher end stuff, uses Filmic. But I have to say that the stock video capabilities in the iPhones appear, particularly in the 12 Plus, to be increasing in the range of what they allow the use. Yeah.
So it doesn't have clean out build. That's the only problem. So if you want to clean out for webcam, you would need something like Filmic Pro or something similar. The iPhone's app itself doesn't have a clean out.
Okay.
And
But
Cameo
that's a HDMI out. That's not going to present to it. That's not going to present to the computer as a webcam. You'd need to go through a capture device for that.
So there's progress here, but I hope that we covered what you needed. And let's move on to Daniel Goldstein's. Is this third to the last question so we'll take some time with it unless somebody pops in with another one. Daniel asks, is Office Hours permanently migrating to a new YouTube channel? Who wants to, Jeffrey is going to be brave and talk for the show.
Brave, yeah, I like that. So what happened this week was Alex on vacation, and in order for him, for us to go to YouTube, Alex would have to give all the keys of the castle away, and he's I wouldn't do that myself. So what we're doing, we've talked about what's called a branded channel, which allows me to do streaming in. So what we're going in through is a branded channel right now. Whether that will be the future, that's what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks. Expected to go back to some sort of normalcy, that being either, well, everything going back into the original channel for at least the next month or so. And then we're going to, because there's even been talks, maybe not even YouTube, but I don't know, I can't officially speak on that aspect right there. But keep that in mind that, it's best to come into the webinar, go to officehours.global and watch it from there. Use Mukana, because the video will always be there in those locations rather than on YouTube.
We have hands up from Ken and Carl and Leo. Let's start with Ken.
Yeah, just to Jeffrey made the point that the last part is the simplest place to go is to go to officehours.global. So no matter where the videos are eventually hosted, they're always going to be, you're always going to find the latest ones on the website. So officehours.global would be if you go to that destination, then all the videos will kind of come into there no matter where they're hosted.
Carl Asmussen.
Yeah, same thing. Just bookmark officehours.global, and that'll be your first protocol for the new videos.
Leo Mendel.
One of the things that Jeffrey mentioned is the difference between a branded channel and a direct channel on YouTube. I spend a lot of time moving people who have set up channels and moving them over to branded channels. So once you're on a brand, you can actually do all the things that you would expect you can do. The management controls under a standard one are not great. It is quite a scary process because you think you could potentially lose and delete all of your videos. You have to follow the instructions. But if you are doing a lot of stuff and you are expecting multiple inputs, move to a branded channel. It's the right thing, in my view, to do.
Well, Locke, and then Rupert.
I just wanted to follow on about the website. It's a really good one-stop shop for schedules and for past shows, and it's really great because it has good descriptions of all of those shows. You can get to them easily. So please go explore.
And if things work as normally, Chad probably heard that and is pushing the link down into it again as we speak. Rupert, go ahead.
I just wanted to pose a follow-up question to Leo. When if there is a migration path from a private channel to a branded channel, do you have to do that wholesale, or can you move certain videos or certain parts of the channel?
In effect, what you do is you create a dummy brand channel, and then you shift everything from one channel to the other, and everything moves over. The only thing that you can't move over is the private URL. So if you have created a private URL, you will lose it. There is officially a way to get it back, or sorry, unofficially, but it's really super tough. You've got to find somebody at YouTube that will permit that for you.
Jeffrey.
One other thing is if you need to move it and you're moving it to a different branded channel that's not linked, there are third-party tools out there that'll help you do the migration, such vidIQ does stuff and TubeBuddy does stuff, and you can get things like 4K Downloader to get your videos off of there. So you have ways to back up and get it for a proper migration.
And Leo has another comment.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I would say that this is, for anybody who's doing a lot of stuff, this is actually really important you do this sooner rather than later, because you're just putting off an eventual thing of pain that you're going to do. The same is also the same for Facebook, where somebody's got a Facebook page and they want to, Facebook profile, and they want to convert it to a page. I would suggest you do it soon, or do it, because you just keep putting it off and it makes the pain worse because you've built even more and more followers, etc., on something that isn't sustainable when it shouldn't. You shouldn't have a business or something running as a profile, which a lot of people have done, and then they haven't. It's just get on and do it and move the two things over.
Ken, go ahead.
It kind of this is why I always emphasize that you should always own your own content and not have it rely on third parties like YouTube or Facebook for where that content lives. You should own it and have it on your own website, and then from there you point it out to those other channels. That way, if something goes wrong or something changes, you'll always have that. You're just always the central point of control, and you're not then reliant upon whatever social channels decide to do in the future.
I just have to say before we finish this part of the conversation, Roscoe, do you have a last thing? And I'll make my comment.
Well, it's kind of I have students all the time that start channels, for different clubs they're in and that kind of stuff. And I was wondering, is there a way that those can be brought underneath these branding channels? Is there a way to bring multiple personal accounts into this type of branded channel?
Leo's nodding. Leo, go ahead.
Yeah, it does take a bit of time to get some of it out. You have to untangle it. And I just went through and had to do all this with somebody with Facebook. They ended up with about 5 different Facebook pages, and we had to clear them all down. And the same with YouTube. And you end up having to work out what you can bring across and what you can't bring across. It's super. Where it always ends up happening is you end up with a new person joining the marketing team who launches your channel, and it's like, yeah, thank you very much. You've just launched my channel, but in your name. And we have a rule in my company that nobody's allowed to launch anything that isn't using a generic email address when they do anything on a brand thing, rather than their own name and things like this. There's lots of things that you follow up, but you can bring it all back together again. And also just remember, the juice is in the quality and the volume of what you have. So if you end up with all of your stuff chucked over 17 different things, A, it's going to be impossible to find the logins, and B, you're losing and diluting what you are. So it is a worthwhile exercise to bring it all together on a platform. Or so bring all your stuff on a platform together. I'm not saying move it all to one platform.
Rupert?
Leo makes a very good point to not try to stay away from using named user accounts to set services up. If you have a domain name and you can set it up in a way that you receive anything before the @ sign, you can set up a service with Vimeo and then just use the email address Vimeo at your domain name. And then if you're going to set up YouTube at your domain name, that also helps you later down the line with spam, because you'll work out where the spam has found your email address from, because you'll be getting spammed at YouTube at, or whatever email address you've used. Also, I just had quite an interesting experience with Zoom. I had several accounts with Zooms, all with different email addresses at different email domains. I moved to the business platform with Zoom. I was able to import my domain names and all my accounts into one umbrella. So they seem to be taking care of that.
Okay, well, my comment was just, I'm shocked since I've been here since I think week 2 or maybe week 3 in the history of Alex Lindsay's Office Hours show. The fact that this whole team, Alex predominantly, but everybody else who has helped, has managed to rebuild and rebuild and rebuild and improve this car while it's been driving, literally on the air every day, has been one of the most interesting technological challenges and successes that I've seen. Going back and realizing what we were doing in those early days, how kind of ramshackle it was, just an idea, to where we are now with a very polished presentation that goes global. I think this has been an amazing accomplishment. And I just wanted to acknowledge that Alex's baby has grown fast and strong, and it's amazing to me what we've managed to accomplish collectively and for him individually. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I'd also say, though, that everything online is this. I mean, it's the one thing that about the online world has over some others, is that everything we deliver is live. Every website that I build is live. It's not sitting static, printed out last week and in a binder. And consequently, it means that innovation has to continue. And I know we don't go much into the website world and SEO, et cetera, but anybody who is involved in that world knows that they literally, if you left it alone and walked away, you give it 6 weeks, you're off the rankings. You give it a year, you don't exist. So for you to continue, even if you're at the top of the game, you have to continue evolving and delivering it. And that's the same with everything else. And I think that's exactly with where you come from, Bill, on this show. What this show is now and what it will be and what it is always moving forward.
Yeah, the curve keeps accelerating. Greg, go ahead and make a last comment, then we'll move to the last 3 questions we have in the queue.
Hey, Bill, I actually didn't want to detract from the conversation we're having right now, but there is kind of a big announcement to make that I just noticed, and I think a lot of the audience members have been waiting for this, and that is that the Zoom Room NDI for Windows has finally dropped now. So there's a release version available on the Zoom website. So those of you that are waiting for Zoom Room NDI for Windows, it's available for download now on the Zoom website. I feel kind of like CNN, so you just remember you heard it here first on Office Hours.
And that happens a lot. We have 3 questions to get through, and we've got a hard out at 8 o'clock, at 9 o'clock. So let's go with Douglas Carmichael. L'acoustics is now selling speakers to the high-end home market, and they say their systems, quote, offer a very same sonic sensation as a festival or live show. Could personal virtual concerts become as real as the price performance bandwidth goes up? I just hope that they don't make it so real that the arguing couple in front of me, between me and the show, doesn't show up in these virtual things. Let's do Carl and Charles, and then we're going to move on to the next question. Go ahead, Carl.
Now, for any A1s listening, this isn't towards you, but most festivals have terrible sound. So if they're reproducing that, I'm not going to be too happy. Speakers don't make it. It's the artist. So the artist is what makes it. So we had an artist here in Australia. So at the moment we're in a temporary lockdown for COVID, pretty much all the states are, and they're not able to travel. So these artists are just doing free gigs on YouTube. That's how they're doing it. Because the artist is what they want to join with their fans. And just because these concerts were paid for, and they'll be rescheduled, so that they'll be able to see them later on. But right now these people want to see them, so they're just going to do free, like an hour or 2 hour concert online that everyone can see for free. That's how they're doing it.
Charles, go ahead.
I think from business point of view, it's good for them to actually start to approach that market, since everybody is starting to build up their home studios a little bit more. I'm with Carl. I'm not sure that I want the same sonic sensation that I had at festivals, because I don't feel like getting tendonitis in my own house. That being said, I wonder how they did restructure their drivers and their processing, because for home use in my studio, I have some Genelecs all around me, and the sound stage is something pleasing that I could listen to these all day long and not be exhausted. You go to a concert and that same sonic sensation, you want to take a nap afterwards. So it's
they're different. They're different. I had an experience. I'll do this very, very briefly. There's a local artist in Phoenix named Alice Tatum, who was a beautiful singer, just wonderful voice. And I went to a small shopping center opening where she was performing, and she was doing Jimi Hendrix, and I was just enraptured. What a great performance from the band and her. But then that exact thing happened to me. The people in front of me who were not paying attention started a conversation and ruined my experience. And I still think of it as the worst of what can happen live. An artist is up there working very hard to create great art, and suddenly anything around you can mess it up. And
I've been wanting to apologize to you about that one, Bill. I'm sorry.
Was that you? Were you? I may have been in Alice's band at that point. Man, that was tough to live through. So last question, John Gerard is in. We've got 5 minutes, 4.5 to talk about it. I just tried out the Ceramonics. It works. I have a Rode Stereo Video Mic Pro. How can I separate the left and right channels so I can record true stereo into the Ceramonic, not just the mono channels? And he has a Y splitter cable. I'm not seeing which particular Ceramonic he's talking about, but if he's talking about the one that I recommended, which I think I have, no, not there. Oh, here it is. This guy does do separate XLRs in and out. You can record true stereo. You have to have everything patched correctly, though. And I have the most success when I'm using it with Filmic Pro. I have had circumstances where I've plugged that lightning connector into other things that didn't have those pathways maintained, and I've gotten a sum to mono signal. So maybe look at your software. Jeffrey, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, you have two types of audio. You have your analog, and then you have your digital. Difference is you have a 3.5 millimeter jack versus a USB jack on it, and of course the 3.5 millimeter has to be at least a TRS for you to get some sort of stereo sound. TRS, it's fairly easy. All you have to do is split it off into the sound card that way, and then use some sort of software to actually split the left and the right channel. Digital is going to be pretty much the same. You're going to need software that has the ability to turn make a left-right channel and not a mono channel to go out to live streams. If you're recording and you're sending it to like an audition or something like that, you can split it right in the audio mixer and then turn those into two separate channels after the fact. You're muted.
Thank you. I'm still getting used to this. Looks like we have about 2.5 minutes left, so we don't really have time, and we're out of questions for today, which is cool. Thank you for coming. We have a hard out at the bottom of the hour. I do want to note that we talked a little bit about the Olympics coming up, and I think there's going to be good reason to chat about that. Well, Courtney, you had your hand up. Did you have a last comment? No? I thought maybe it was something.
I was just saying it's the top of the hour, Bill, not the bottom.
Oh, is it the top? Did I say bottom of the hour? You're right. It is the top of the hour, and we're going to be finishing up. I think if you haven't seen Office Hours, and if you want to recommend something, the show yesterday I thought was fabulous, and people brought up the shows that we've had in the past where Michael Cioni was on, and the one where our friend Felipe Baez did. Those are great examples of when this show is hitting on all cylinders. It is a fabulous resource. Leo, did you have a comment before we finishing up as we head toward the
Yeah, very quick thing. Tomorrow on the second hour, Jeffrey and I will be doing a sort of a head-to-head of StreamYard versus Restream their studios.
Excellent.
We are going to need, or I'm going to need, a number of people in the StreamYard side so that I can bring you in, and we're going to try and attempt to bring it all in back into Zoom, etc., etc.
Leah, how do you want them to contact you if they want to be part of the test?
Contact me on Discord directly. DM me on Discord, and I'll include people. I can have up to, I think I can have up to 15 in my StreamYard, but I probably will only want to have 10 on the screen.
Excellent.
But I only want the best people. The rest can go to Jeffrey.
Yeah, the problem is we all self-assess. Anyway, so great. Thank you all for participating. We appreciate your being a part of the Office Hours family and team. It's been a great day, and thank you. I'm Bill Davis, and stumbling my way through these shows. I'll be back tomorrow as your host, and somewhere at a time when my little last 8:59 changes to 9 o'clock, this whole thing will collapse because Alex will turn it off. We hope you come back. We hope you enjoyed our chat today. And remember, we do this 365 days a year. We have, I guess, 400 and something shows into this. We always show up, and it's always a pleasure to meet with these people, some of the smartest people.